My name is Andy Mark, and I'm the author of a book titled Stories of the Humboldt Wagon Road. The book was published in 2020 by the History Press, and it's mostly a collection of interesting stories about people who lived or traveled along the old Humboldt Wagon Road out of Chico from the mid-1860s to the mid-1890s, the early years. The book also has a lot of detailed historical background information scattered throughout to satisfy you history purists. The book includes information I gathered from other historians naturally, but most of the material came from reading through historical newspaper articles. Today, I'd like to share with you a story that I featured in my book about Chico's role in the mad rush for silver in the Black Rock Desert during the years 1866 and 1867. The following slideshow is a condensed version of that story, but it has some new information and many more images that the book does not have. So it's going to be a little different. To start with, where is the Black Rock Desert? With a rugged vehicle, the quickest and most direct way would be to follow the path that I plotted out on this map. It's about 200 miles from Chico down near the star to the Black Rock Desert where the arrow is. You take Highway 32 out of Chico until you reach Highway 36. Then go east from there until you connect to Highway 395 just after Susanville. About 25 miles out of Susanville, you turn off on a dirt road that will lead you to the Smoke Creek Desert and eventually the town of Gerlach. Gerlach is located near the southwestern end of the Black Rock Desert. The Black Rock Desert region is roughly within this area here. Here's a map of the road from Chico to Idaho, drawn by road builder John Mullen in 1865. The newspaper spelled it M-U-L-L-A-N, and that is probably the proper spelling. But this map I have here had M-U-L-L-E-N, so I had to go with it. The entire map went all the way from Chico to Idaho, but I cropped it to leave out the part we're not really interested in and to give us a better view of the part that we are interested in. Some of the features are not accurately placed, but the map provides a good sense of how the road went. The Chico and Humboldt Wagon Road started in Chico, down here in the lower left-hand corner, and it wound its way through the foothills and mountains, and about here it reached the big summit, the highest point on the road at about 6,600 feet and about 45 miles from Chico. And then it dropped down in elevation and passed through Big Meadows, now the site of Lake Almanor, before it continued on its way the rest of the way to Susanville. The road was 100 miles long. Now for some background information. In 1860, John Bidwell laid out the town of Chico, and by then his agricultural operations were well underway. So he felt at the time it'd be a good idea to find a way to ship out his products from his field crops, orchards, and livestock to a larger market and to secure the town of Chico's future. So in 1861, when news came out that there was a silver strike in the Humboldt Range of northwestern Nevada, he wanted to get in on the action. He proposed a Trans-Sierra Wagon Road that would go to the mines, and he wanted to make Chico the western terminal. Let's go to the previous map because I want to show you where the Humboldt Range is. So looking at the right of your map here, I'm drawing a line around it. It's about 70 or so miles southeast of the Black Rock Desert, give or take a few miles, depending on where you're starting and where you're ending. The road from the Black Rock Desert to the Humboldt Range was a little bit longer. I want you to pay particular attention to this town right here that I'm drawing a line around. It's called Unionville, and we'll bring it up later in the story. It's pretty important. Now up at the top of the map, I want to show you one more point of interest. And in the center of the top, I'm drawing a line around a town called Fort Bidwell. We'll bring it up shortly. Let's go back to the old map again. In 1862, there was news of another silver strike, this time up in southwestern Idaho. That prompted John Bidwell to really get to work on his road. By September of that year, the news reported that Bidwell had opened a road over the Sierras and that the road was 65 miles long. That suggested that the road to Prattville was open. Prattville was in the Big Meadows area. In 1863, John Bidwell and 4 others received a 20-year franchise from the state legislature to build and operate a toll road from Chico to Susanville. Later that year, the news reported that pack trains, droves of cattle, and wagons were traveling over the Humboldt Wagon Road destined for the Humboldt mines on a daily basis. In 1864, the Chico and Humboldt Wagon Road Company was incorporated, and John Bidwell was the chief shareholder. In 1865, some Idaho businessmen got together with John Bidwell, and they developed a stage line to go from Chico to Idaho and back. But the line had troubles from the very beginning. There wasn't good road maintenance, there were Indian attacks, and it wasn't really prepared for winter travel. So by the fall of that year, they abandoned the line altogether. The original road actually went north from Susanville. Now this is just a very rough idea of how it went to give you a sense of how the road wandered around. It eventually reached Surprise Valley. From there it went east to today's Summit Lake. Like I said, this was generally how that section of the road went. This is not real precise. Later, in 1865, they decided to shorten the distance by moving that section of the route eastward through the Black Rock Desert, as you see right here. Fort Bidwell is located at the top of the map about here, close to the original route. It was named in honor of John Bidwell because while he was in Congress, Bidwell persuaded the Army to build a fort there to protect the settlers in Surprise Valley and travelers along the road from Chico to Idaho from Indian attacks. Even after that section of the route was moved eastward, however, Fort Bidwell undoubtedly joined Fort McGarry, located near Summit Lake, in defending travelers along the road to Idaho. This is Fort Bidwell circa 1886. There's a school on the left and a hotel on the right. There are still people living at Fort Bidwell among some of the old buildings built in the 1800s. Here's a photo taken in 2019 of an old church. Here's another 2019 photo of an old building there at Fort Bidwell, a general store. Let's return to the old map. In January of 1866, there were reports of another silver strike, this time in the Black Rock Range of northwestern Nevada. That fueled more enthusiasm for reopening the road to Idaho. When Congressman Bidwell used his political influence to obtain a mail contract between Idaho and Susanville, and also switched the western terminus of the Susanville contract from Oroville to Chico, the road's future looked promising. There was a fair amount of traffic on the road that year, a lot of passengers, freight, and mail. It was still subject to a few Indian attacks, and there was a stage robbery on the Big Summit, but things were going well until the first heavy snows arrived. Stagecoaches couldn't make it through all the way anymore, so in November, stagecoach traffic from Chico to Idaho ended. But the mail contract still had to be honored, so they delivered the mail, and there were people traveling over the road other ways. But the mail was kind of irregular at times, even though there were people like James Mack, the proprietor of the stage line, who kept 8 to 12 horses and sleighs on hand at the summit to get the mail and passengers over the hump. Early in 1867, the post office ended the mail contract, and that, coupled with the completion of the western portion of the Central Pacific Railroad up to the Big Bend of the Humboldt River, pretty much ended Bidwell's dream of Chico serving as a primary connection and a major transportation route between the northern mines at one end and San Francisco and beyond at the other. But nonetheless, the Humboldt Wagon Road opened up the hills and mountains east of Chico to virgin stands of timber to satisfy a hungry lumber industry. Settlements popped up all along the road, and a thriving resort business was created. Before we leave this slide, I would like to direct you to the upper right-hand corner of this map, right here. It shows the Black Rock Range, and it says, "This range is rich in gold and silver quartz." Now, the map was made in 1865 before the 1866 rush for silver in the Black Rock Desert, but they were looking for silver in there for many years before that. The Black Rock, the desert's namesake, is located on the southern tip of the Black Rock Range. Between me and the Black Rock, you can see this dry lake bed. Some people call it a playa. It's made up of sediments that were deposited by the ancient Lake Lahontan during the last ice age, and is mostly devoid of life thanks to thousands of years of evaporation that concentrated minerals and salts into an inhospitable environment for plants and animals. The Black Rock Playa is shaped like a Y. The bottom leg goes from near the town of Gerlach up to the tip of the Black Rock Range, and then one leg goes up the east side of the Black Rock Range, and another leg goes up the west side of the Black Rock Range. Now this playa is supposedly one of the largest flat spots on Earth. It's about 200 square miles, which makes it ideal for activities that require a lot of space. Like setting the land speed record. In October of 1997, the sound barrier was first officially broken on land in the Black Rock Desert by a jet-propelled car that shot across the desert floor at 763 miles an hour. In the photo below, it is not breaking the sound barrier. This was a warm-up trial. It was doing a little over 500 miles an hour, I believe. The name of the car was Thrust SSC, SSC standing for Supersonic Car. Actually, it was a jet on wheels, and it was driven by a man named Andy Green from the UK. He's a member of the Royal Air Force. To me, this was a pretty significant event in history. Another thing that goes on in the Black Rock Desert is rocket launching. Amateur rocket clubs go there and members fire their homemade rockets up into the sky. I understand they come back down with parachutes. Some of these projectiles can go up awfully high sometimes, even over 70 miles. Again, you need a lot of space. But perhaps this place is best known for its Burning Man Festival, which takes place every year around Labor Day. One exception, 2020. Why? Well, of course, COVID-19. They have a lot of fun out there. It's an artistic and spiritual event for many, many people. So now that we're more familiar with the Black Rock Desert, let's get on with our story. In 1849, a man named James Hardin, who was a member of a wagon train crossing the Black Rock Desert on the Applegate-Lassen Immigrant Trail, found a shiny metallic substance on the ground, which he thought might be lead, while hunting along the Black Rock Range. The wagon train stopped there for a rest, and Hardin and at least one other man went out there looking for game. And when he found the substance, he brought it back to the campsite to fashion into bullets, but I don't think that was ever really accomplished. Hardin took some of the rock to Petaluma, where he eventually settled. Sometime afterwards, it was assayed and found to be high in silver content. In 1858, Hardin and a party of men went to the Black Rock Desert to search for the ledge of silver, where he found the specimen. The expedition could not relocate the ledge because either the country had changed considerably over time, or Hardin simply forgot where it was. He came back the next year, and some say the year after that, with no more success. In 1859, the famous pioneer, Peter Lassen, and some others also looked for this lost silver lode. Many of us are aware that Peter Lassen knew John Bidwell, and that they spent some time together. In 1841, soon after John Bidwell arrived in California, he landed a job with John Sutter. In 1843, while he was still working for Sutter, some horses were stolen from John Bidwell near Sutter's Fort. Bidwell heard that the horses were taken by some men who were going up north to Oregon. So, a small posse was formed at Sutter's Fort to head up there and get the horses back. Peter Lassen was part of this posse. Eventually, they did retrieve the horses somewhere around today's town of Red Bluff. On the way up there, they passed through this most beautiful and fertile land that John Bidwell immediately fell in love with. This was his first glimpse of the land that was to eventually become his future home, Rancho Chico. On the way back, Peter Lassen became enamored with some land near the confluence of the Sacramento River and Deer Creek. When he got back, he didn't waste much time filing for a land grant from the Mexican government for about a little over 22,000 acres around where the town of Vina is located today. To petition for this land grant, he had to have a map. Who drew the map for him? But John Bidwell. Peter Lassen was awarded the land grant in 1844, but he went into debt over it, and finally in 1852 he sold the last of it to a man named Henry Gerke. And sometime after that, Peter Lassen settled in Honey Lake Valley. Susanville is at the head of Honey Lake Valley. While he was there in Honey Lake Valley, Lassen hears of this lost silver lode, Hardin's lost ledge, so he decides to try his hand at prospecting in the Black Rock Range. He gets together with two other companions, named Edward Clapper and Lamarcus Wyatt, and they made arrangements to rendezvous with the Captain Weatherlow and a small group that he was with out in the Black Rock Range. Weatherlow left a couple of days earlier than Lassen and his little group, but when Lassen, Clapper, and Wyatt arrived there in the Black Rock Range, they failed to meet up with Weatherlow. They didn't know where he was, so they ended up camping in the small canyon in the Black Rock Range. The next morning, for some unknown reason, some unknown sniper or snipers fired at him from the ridge above and killed Peter Lassen and Edward Clapper. Lamarcus Wyatt made a miraculous escape and ended up riding bareback all the way back to Honey Lake Valley to report the incident. This is the canyon where the murder took place. You can see that there's a marker here. It's in front of the vehicle, and it tells you a little bit about Peter Lassen's background and how he was a pioneer. It also describes the murder. It says the men were camped in the area right next to this big boulder here that I'm circling right here. We'll get back to this photo later. So Lamarcus Wyatt goes back to Honey Lake Valley and he reports the incident, and then some men came out from Honey Lake Valley to the murder site and buried Peter Lassen and Edward Clapper there on the spot. Later that year, some Freemasons came out and retrieved Lassen's body and brought it back to Honey Lake Valley to give him a proper burial. Lassen was a Mason himself, but they left Edward Clapper behind, and over time the site of the murder was lost. It was forgotten until 1990, when some recreationalists who were poking around in this canyon, I heard some sources say they were actually rockhounds, came across some bones that were sticking out from the bank. They reported it to the authorities. The FBI and the Smithsonian Institute got involved, and they determined that the bones were those of Edward Clapper. Then they reproduced, with the aid of a computer, this sketch of what Edward Clapper's face probably looked like. Pretty neat, huh? You can see this on the wall at the Lassen Historical Museum in Susanville. Other than a brief spike in prospecting that was reported in mid-1860, the enthusiasm for searching for the lost silver deposit slowed over the next few years, at least partly because of Indian hostilities in the area. Nonetheless, a small number of men persisted in looking. This particular image is a painting by the famous Western artist Frederick Remington. It actually represents a scene in which cowboys are fighting with Plains Indians, but it resembles the Black Rock country quite a bit, so I decided to include it. It's an excellent painting. Then, in January of 1866, the situation suddenly changed. There were reports that the hardened ledge had finally been found, along with other potentially productive ledges, some up to 100 feet wide and several miles long. As more reports came in, prospectors from all over started to swarm in. Being so close to the action, some Susanville citizens in particular began to stake their claims. Meanwhile, Chico's paper, the Chico Current, kept a close eye on the events. A Chico attorney, J.C. Martin, was quick to get in on the action too, and owned some feet by that spring, expressing great confidence in the wealth held within the Black Rock ores. Here we have a James Martin business card that I found in the paper, the Chico Current, June 2nd, 1866 edition. This is actually a recurring ad that you could see, probably running for maybe a half year or so, I'm not sure. However, from the beginning to the end, various tests on the ores yielded differing results. Some indicated fabulous returns, others found nothing at all. Reputable assayers from various cities, including San Francisco, determined it contained no silver at all. The problem was that the mostly black, waxy-looking ore, which was said to resemble the character of the material coming from the rich Oahe mines of southwestern Idaho, was considered atypical, and it was reported that few people knew how to extract the silver from it. However, the Black Rockers had an assayer of their own, who went by the name of Professor Charles Eisenbeck. The professor was able to convince enough people that only he really understood the rebellious nature of the ore, with the silver existing in a chloride state that puzzled even the most experienced assayers. Eisenbeck claimed to not only find silver in the ore, but gold also. Professor Eisenbeck was an assayer and copper smelter from Genesee Valley in Plumas County, which is northeast of Butte County. What were his credentials? He was supposedly a graduate from the Freiburg Institute in Germany, where a university that specializes in mining and technology is still located today. In March of 1866, Eisenbeck supervised the working of 3 tons of the Black Rock ore at Torrey's Mill near Unionville, Nevada, located in the Humboldt mining region, southeast of the Black Rock Desert, which we pointed out earlier. However, Eisenbeck determined the process needed to be improved. Because of the continued uncertainty, the people of the Unionville area were hesitant to process any more ore from the Black Rock region. In the lower left, we have a photo of the marker there today. You can still visit Unionville. It's not too many miles off I-80. The marker explains the background of Unionville and its history. When you go into town, there are still people living in homes there. I remember one really nice lawn. But there's also some ruins of the old town there, and that's what you see in the lower right-hand part of the slide. Arrangements were then made to haul over 30 tons of the ore to Dall's Mill in Franktown, about 20 miles south of today's Reno, on old US 395. The mill was located near the Comstock lode. The results from these workings were much more promising, so a mining company made up of prospectors from Chico could work the ores with more confidence. A lack of records suggests this was not an incorporated company, but a loosely organized group of individuals with a common interest in mining, frequently referred to in the news as the Chico Company. Letters coming to Chico from the Black Rock region were reassuring, suggesting the test results were ranging from $200 to an amazing $6,000 per ton. By September, 2 settlements were well established along the west side of the Black Rock Range. One was at Double Springs, today referred to as Double Hot Springs. The other was at Hardin City. Each had a post office. Double Springs was reported to have a half a dozen houses. Hardin City was made up of 15 well-built houses, as well as grocery and liquor stores, butcher stops, and a stable. Double Springs was located nearly 6 miles north of the Black Rock, and Hardin City was about 5 miles north of that. Today, Double Hot Springs has a fence surrounding it with walk-through openings to discourage people from getting too close to the water, which is around 175 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. These pools are very dangerous and have taken the lives of unsuspecting people. Dogs seem to be especially vulnerable because they simply don't realize how hot the water is. Fortunately, the water does flow out of these 2 pools and gradually cools down as it gets farther away. Water is available here year-round, so this was a good place to build a town. Hardin City was located in and around the left side of the open area, as seen from the western edge of the Black Rock Range. I'm standing in the lower part of the Black Rock Range, looking west. It looks very flat, but actually drops off a little bit, and as it drops off, you can see where there's some ruins. Those rocks are probably stacked about 7 feet high, and we know that those ruins were built probably in 1866, maybe 1867. So back to the story. An ore crushing mill was placed at Hardin City, but by December it was still not in operation because there were problems with the apparatus and amalgamation materials. The following month, the news reported that J.C. Martin had forwarded some of the Black Rock ore specimens to John Bidwell, a member of the Chico Mining Company, while the congressman was in Washington, D.C. The news said that Bidwell had the rock tested by the most highly qualified metallurgists and mineralogists in Europe, who determined the ores to be very rich, so plans were made to reorganize the mining company on a more permanent basis. The news also reported that the Freiberg Institute made a proposition for a part interest in this new company when it was formed, so things were really looking up. Professor Eisenbeck was still testing the ores and coming up with great results. One method he was known to use was called the bake pan process, whereas the rock was crushed with a hand mortar, some of it placed in a bake pan with the proper chemicals, and then heated over a slow charcoal fire. Over the next few months, more and more reports were pouring in about the potential richness of the Black Rock mines, and Eisenbeck was working closely with the group from Chico. In June 1867, it was reported that the Chico Company had extensive mines in the Black Rock region. By then it was obvious that they were Sol and Eisenbeck. However, Unionville's newspaper, the Humboldt Register, had their own opinion of Eisenbeck, reporting on July 13th that, quote, "This prince of humbugs is again on his way out to Black Rock with a fresh installment of victims to insanity." That summer, more tests in the Black Rock ore were made at Dall's Mill, with more great results. Eisenbeck supervised one final test at the mill in the presence of professional metallurgists to erase any lingering doubts. The results from different ledges produced values from $140 to $340 per ton. That was enough to convince everyone. 2 more mills were ordered for the Black Rock region. Owners of the Hardin City Mill agreed to hire Eisenbeck at $1,000 per month. By then, the Chico prospectors got serious too. On September 21st, the Chico Gold and Silver Mining Company was incorporated to extract gold, silver, and other metals and acquire property as necessary in the Hardin Mining District, Humboldt County, Nevada. Here's a copy of the incorporation papers for the Chico Gold and Silver Mining Company. there's 13 original investors. You can see James Martin there at the top and John Bidwell down towards the bottom. Here's a copy of a Chico Gold and Silver Mining Company stock certificate. You can see that John Bidwell was the president of the company and J.C. Martin was the secretary. And this particular shareholder was J.C. Mandeville. He was a member of the group that received a 20-year franchise to operate a toll road from Chico to Susanville back in 1863. Some other notable Chico names involved in the formation of the mining company were George Allen, at one time the constable of Chico Township, Ira A. Weatherby, proprietor of the Chico Hotel, and W. H. Dern, justice of the peace and owner of a bookstore. And here we have a nice portrait of John Bidwell about that time. It was actually made in 1865. Weatherby relocated the Chico Hotel to 2nd and Salem Streets, which is what we're looking at here, after the one on 2nd and Broadway burned down in 1874. So while he was involved in the Black Rock rush, he owned a hotel on 2nd and Broadway. However, by mid-November, things began to turn sour when the mill at Hardin City, which was specially equipped to suit Eisenbeck's process, failed to produce any gold or silver after crushing more than 10 tons of the Black Rock ore. Soon afterward, Eisenbeck seems to have disappeared. The Chico Current, which had up to this point been all aboard on the Black Rock bandwagon, began to smell a rat. It suddenly stopped reporting stories about the promise of the Black Rock ores. The failure also prompted the Humboldt Register to do some homework on Eisenbeck and discovered that he had a history of fraud. It reported a story about how he deceived the town of Montgomery, California, in a similar fashion. The November 30th Humboldt Register wrote that it reported the Montgomery incident, quote, for the special benefit of those moonstruck individuals of large faith who are still following the ignis fatuus of Black Rock and Eisenbeck into the dismal swamp of costly experience. Nonetheless, the Black Rockers still held out hope. In December, more rock was crushed at a newly constructed mill at Hardin City, but with the same dismal results. By January, all hope was lost, and soon prospectors started to abandon the area. How could Eisenbeck have duped the Black Rock prospectors so easily? It's been said that over 15,000 people streamed into Hardin City during its brief existence. The obvious answer seems to be that he must have salted the ore. But why was Dahl's mill getting such great results even when Eisenbeck wasn't around? One theory suggests that the batteries and pans at Dahl's had some residue left over from the truly rich ores that were crushed from the Comstock lode. No one really knows for sure. The question remains, is there still a legitimate silver ledge out there? Hardin certainly thought it was worth going back to look for, although what he found was shiny material that didn't really resemble the black waxy clay that inspired the mad rush of the 1860s. Did the ledge get buried after a violent thunderstorm shifted the earth around? And can it become exposed once again under similar conditions? We're going to return back to the Lassen Clapper murder site. The photo in the upper left-hand corner was taken in 2010, and you can see that the one below that, taken in 2020, shows another big rock next to the marker. And if you look at the wash in the foreground of the photos, the wash is much bigger 10 years later. If we look up the canyon from the marker, in 2010, we can see that it's pretty narrow and has a lot of vegetation. But by 2020, it has this large wash going through it. That wash is probably about 15 or 20 feet across, right about there. And it's got lots of rocks thrown about too. There's even a better photo than this that someone took soon after this major weather event. It's on the Black Rock Explorers Society website. It really shows how devastating this particular event was, and much more rocks were strewn about. This 2020 photo is actually showing how the terrain is starting to reclaim itself. So the point I'm trying to make is that the land around here changes very abruptly and suddenly at times. Therefore, it's possible that there still is a silver ledge out there, just waiting for some gully washer to expose it once more for some lucky prospector to find. Maybe you'd be interested in trying to find Hardin's lost ledge. So if you don't mind hot days, cold nights, and unpredictable winds, sharing your blood with a few mosquitoes, gnats, and ticks, and it's not too much of a bother to sidestep a rattlesnake or two, then the Black Rock Desert just might be the place for you. I came across this little critter in the Black Rock Range, about 2 miles from Hardin City. Can't find any silver? Well, no problem. You can always look for some pretty rocks nearby. All these rocks we collected were within 2 or 3 miles of Hardin City. I'd like to go back to this photo we saw earlier to say that even though the Black Rock Range proved to be a big humbug back in 1866 and 1867, it's not because there isn't any gold or silver in that country. To the right of the Black Rock, in the background, you can see how they're mining on the slope of the Kama Mountains. That's the Hycroft mine. It's about 45 miles east of Gerlach and probably about 15 to 20 miles southeast of the Black Rock. This mine was very successful in finding gold and silver. So it's not that there isn't any of that stuff around, it just doesn't seem to be where the prospectors of 1866 and 1867 were looking for it. Well, that's the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it. Of course, for a more detailed version of this story, you can always refer to the book titled Stories of the Humboldt Wagon Road, written by Andy Mark and published by the History Press in 2020. Thank you.